Hello. Hey. Good evening, everybody. I can see we are not all the workshop involved. It's a pity, and I would really recommend to, to talk to your colleagues and inviting them to join the evening presentation is an opportunity to listen to what our guests are doing, what they are involved with, and their thoughts. So, a part of meeting them in your own workshop, this is an opportunity to get a wider perspective. As you know, the program is written in your booklet, so you know what you are expecting. Is the famous 80 years old war, Spain against Netherlands. This is the we were talking a few days ago about this big fight. It was a time. Netherlands won at that time. We don't know how it will end up now, but what I'm sure is both of them are two practitioners, so they run their own office and are involved not only in teaching, not only in thinking, that is what mainly people do at school, but also in constructing, building architecture, so building words by stones and materials. And we will have two different stories from which we can learn something, I guess. First is our speaker, Jurjen Zeinstra from TU Delft. 40 minutes each, and then we can go for a drink. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gennaro. Is this working? Everybody can hear it? First of all, I must say that actually I'm now in a bread and breakfast, and Hector is my neighbor, and we have breakfast every morning, and we are very good friends. So this story about war or competition, it's absolutely not true. First, I have to start with that. Then I'm first going to read a brief text about our office as a short introduction, but then I will show the project. So don't immediately run away. The title of this little text is called Patterns and Material Surfaces. Some thoughts on the architectural position of the office Zeinstra van Gelderen. If one would characterize our work and our office, there are a number of topics that we find particularly important for our practice. A concept or narrative that sometimes steers the design is one of them. Dutch architecture and design, as it developed during the 1990s, showed a strong focus on concept. Its results were inventive, bold, challenging, funny, and sometimes all of this together. At the same time, and especially when looking back at this architecture that was quite successful, also internationally, it is not difficult to see its weaker points. The Dutch architecture and design tended to become too diagrammatic, ignoring the specific qualities that are related to the architectural handling of materials, to building tectonics, and to issues like surface treatment and detailing. So one can say that in its ambition to be inventive, it ignored the convention as a way to relate to history. In its ambition to be bold, it ignored the subtle and ambiguous layers that good architecture reveals. In its ambition to be challenging, it ignored the less spectacular, but in the end maybe more satisfying connection to the ordinary and the everyday environment. And in its ambition to be funny, it forgot that the joke will lose its freshness, will become worn out after a while, especially for the people that are confronted with it on a daily basis. Still, as a Dutch architect, educated in the 1980s and started practicing in the 1990s, I cannot ignore the circumstances that have shaped me and also shaped Michael, my partner, and the conditions that made it possible for my generation to start an office in an incredible good conditions, especially for young architects. And I also realize that the conceptual approach, of which now looking back at this period I'm rather critical, is also an approach that our office is part of. So being aware of all my critical remarks, I still maintain the value of the concept. And I will also try to illustrate the specific approach that our office has always been looking for during the almost 20 years of its existence. To start with one issue or one thought, for us, the concept is not simply fictional, but strongly related to context. Context is a crucial idea in all of our projects. Context, in our view, is not limited solely to the physical environment. It also involves all the associations, whether architectural, social, historical, ecological, or theoretical, that are embedded in the actual design proposal. Context, in this meaning of the word, needs to be reworked, interpreted, and aestheticized before it can actually feed the concept. In our projects, we try to enrich this conceptual approach by adding layers and ambiguity to the scheme. We think architecture needs this layeredness to enrich the experience of the user. So what we are looking for is inventiveness, an open mind, and a drive for experimentations. And in the development of our practice, we continue to have strong fascination for a number of particular things. One of those things is patterns. Patterns for us are very important, and we talk about it a lot and we work with it a lot. Patterns and materials. Materials is the other thing that we are always interested in. So when we look at patterns, we look at the way they are composed, and when we look at materials, we always look for the potential for treatment of material, and especially the surface of the material. Patterns and materials in that sense have a broader meaning than just some form of ornament. They operate on various scales, and you could say they even include planning, organization, structure. Planning and material surface have to be composed, they have to be made, so you could say they are about composition and aesthetic effects. For our office, these compositions, when I talk about the patterns, are fundamentally architectural. We look for compositions that in themselves have an evident logic based on architectural categories as use, building structure, or building codes, but we always consider them from an aesthetic point of view. Patterns and compositions really have to do with aesthetics in our view. Okay, I'll skip the rest because otherwise Hector will be mad at me. And I'm going to show some works, if I can find my little, oh, I think I left it at the other side of the table. I'm sorry for that. Oh, this little pointer. No, that's no problem. I can also do it in another way. Our office, I'm going to show you just a few projects, but I'm going to try to explain this issue of patterns and materials in them. One of them, which is really about material, is the rubber house. It's a project from 2010. Interesting thing about this project is actually that we worked on it together with a theater maker, which is Qiying Liu, and that has a history. Here you see Michael, my office partner, going inside the rubber house. But the history actually of the rubber house starts with especially Michael doing a lot of stage design for plays. For a friend of his, who is a theater maker, Qi. And of course, these are always projects that there is no money, there is no time, and you simply have to make something very fast. This is one. I'm not going to talk about them, you just look at them. This is another one. And this is one, also a very funny one. This is one. And I think this is the last one. And what is, of course, with these designs, the case is there is a play, there is an idea of the director, and actually you could say there is a program, but because the play is the program, and of course you have a lot of freedom, but the starting point is the play and the interpretation of the play by the theater maker. Now, what we this is also an important project in the start for the rubber house, because what we said is that you could also reverse this, because why not make something, and that is what we discussed with the theater maker, we make something and you actually respond to it. So it's like doing it the other way around. And because we were inspired by a previous project that we did, which was the Tumble House. I'm not going to talk very long about it, but that was a house you could place in different positions, and every position had a door. And we noticed actually that such a strange kind of experimental object triggered all kind of views. So you could say that it triggers a kind of play in very different ways of the word play. The Tumble House also for us was an experiment in material. You could say there was a very funny project. We got a lot of publicity and it was exposed in a lot of shows all over, even to the United States that was transported. But we also knew that we actually failed with this project because our client, who was a corporation, said, you have to build it in wood. They gave us a lot of freedom and we could do an experimental thing, but we had to build it in wood. And it turned out to be a rather heavy object, so you needed really strong guys to tumble it on all these different sides. So when we were building this, and of course we had a lot of fun, and also with developing the interior, which had these different doors, one door becoming a bed and all that stuff, we said we could do this again, but then in a different, lighter material. So we were kind of fascinated already when with the end of this project, and then at a certain point we started to do experiments with plastic. This is a kind of artificial rubber, and you make it out of two components. It's very simple. It's used by a lot of sculptures actually to make the molds for their sculptures, and it's also used to make these ornaments in the ceiling. If you want to repair them, people use this material. And we thought that's an interesting material, and this is one of the experiments where we said, okay, if we have a tumbled thing which could tumble, what would it look like? And we didn't know exactly. But then at a certain point we said, actually, it would be interesting to instead of this thing which is very expressive and has all kind of different forms, what would happen if you would actually say it would be a very simple, almost anonymous object, and actually the special thing would be inside, would be the interior. And that was interesting, because then we started to work with thinking about this special interior, and we knew it had to be very small. I have to say at the same time, of course, because you need an opportunity to do this kind of experiments, we were asked by people who organized an exhibition in Germany, in the Ruhr area, and they were actually asking for the Tumble House, because they said, yeah, can you bring the Tumble House, but because we have an exhibition on small movable architecture, and this would fit in very nice. And we said, no, listen, we cannot give you that project anymore because it's no longer there. But if you want, we can make something new, because we wanted to do this with this new material. And they agreed. They didn't give us any money because they had no budget for us, but they had space for us. That was very good. So what we did, we said, okay, this is an experiment, and lucky enough, the Dutch government at that time still wanted to kind of stimulate architecture and especially research in architecture. So we went to these grants, to these people that actually gave the money, and you could do a presentation. And there were a lot of people, of course, queuing because all the architects wanted to have this grant. And before us, there were people that wanted to do research in occupied territories in Israel and whatever, all kind of things. And we went there only with model, and we were only talking about material. And somehow they became very interested in it. They said, okay, we're going to give you money to build this thing. Of course, this was one of the models that we brought there. You might say this is actually it's very close to what the rubber house in the end looked like, because it's actually exactly the same material, it is the same light effects, only this is a very small one. And of course it was a little bit experimental because we didn't know exactly how to make it, and we still had to experiment. This is a picture from the inside of that model. And this is the drawing that we then made after making these models, and we of course we had to do a lot of investigation because nobody actually knew how this material would work if you would make it on a larger scale. Nobody had done that, and we tried to call all kind of specialists all in Europe. For instance, one of the questions that we had, will this pavilion will it stand up? How will the stability actually work? Because we only had money for buying this material. It's not so cheap. And there was a time limit, and this exhibition would be there. So we could not fail. When we would build it, it had to be good. So when talking also with the people who would actually build it, to great people that work a lot for artists and are very clever. They're much better than normal contractors. They said, okay, let's not make the risk. We make a little frame inside because the frame will anyway hold it up. So that's what we did. Here you can see we did a few experiments just to test effects and to also test how the frame would, if you would notice the frame. Well, you didn't notice if you painted it in the right color. The other tests we did were actually on surface. That was also, we are very aware that there was a very practical issue with this thing. We knew that we had to make this interior out of polystyrene, very cheap polystyrene, and it was very easy to handle, so that would be the interior element. And then we knew how would it actually react to this artificial rubber, and how would it, wouldn't you get a dirty surface? So what we did was we did a number of experiments where we used different oils, and in the end we discovered that actually, well, here you can see the interior. This was the polystyrene interior of the rubber house, and here you see the people actually working on it. It's like a sculptural object. Very funny. You build an interior as a massive thing. And then for us, the most beautiful way to treat the surface was actually to have this very cheap plastic tape and to cover the whole this whole object with this plastic tape, because we knew from the experiments that then you would get a kind of three-dimensional print on the surface of this interior that also suggested some sort of organic thing, because this tape was not regular, you had little differences in it, and we found that very beautiful. So we used the tape and then sprayed a little oil on it, and then the pouring started. And of course, since we didn't know the effects of this amount of artificial rubber, we didn't want to take any risks, so the people used all kind of masks for chemical reactions that were kind of, some people warned us about it, said, oh, if you have this amount, you will get an enormous heat, and some others said, no, it will not happen. And so we were prepared for the worst, but everything went well. Here you can actually see It's the cube. Inside is the polystyrene interior, and then everything is poured in. Okay, then when the pouring was finished, of course, just like concrete, it didn't take much long. Then we had to get out the polystyrene, and we thought, well, some people said you can maybe simply use some chemical stuff, but we didn't trust it, also because we thought it might affect the surface again. So actually the demolishment of the polystyrene core had to be done in a very funny way. There was a kind of hole in the rubber house, at the bottom of the rubber house, and they'd simply dig their way in, just like how people are digging for precious metals and stuff like this. So there was and here you can see that this is in the final phase. It has already removed all the polystyrene and is now very precisely removing the last parts of this polystyrene. Actually, this phase took a lot of time, and the builders really underestimated this. But they were also very nice, and they did it. Okay, then it was finished. The rubber house was finished. Actually, the metal frame that we used for being sure that it would be stand up proved to be actually very, very important, because we used the metal frame to have removable screw eyes to place it on top, so that we could actually transport it. And then when it was in the right place, you could pull these things out again very simply. You just needed a ladder, and you draw them out again, and then the rubber house had a flat roof again. Here you actually see it standing in front of the place where it was built by these people, these very friendly people, still with these things on top of it, ready for transport. And here you see the final image. It has arrived in Germany, and it was used for a performance by the theater play in a very beautiful setting in the evening with lights on it. And so that was a very interesting project, very small project. We had just enough money for buying the materials. We didn't make any money out of it. We were in a lucky position. I was talking about the 90s and how good it was for Dutch architects, because we, as a very small office, got a very big commission, which is called IDOC. I'm going to show some things about it. And actually we did 2 buildings in this huge block. This is an enormous block with a parking underneath it, standing in the water in the IJ, in this very central in Amsterdam. An artificial block, and there were 4 architects working on it. So our office were doing. I don't know if this. Yeah, this is working. Our office were doing this building and this building, and then other offices were doing other. One office did the parking and the public space, and then there was an office that did the Palace of Justice, which is in the head of it, and then another office was doing a big hotel for a Spanish company. So that was great for us, of course, because it was a really big commission. It was a really big building, and it was very challenging. But there was also something very strange about this commission, because we didn't design the urban plan. It was designed by Dick van Gameren and Bjarne Masterbroek. And it was a typical 1990s plan, you could say, very conceptual in a way. Because what was the idea? You had in red this urban block, and then they said, okay, we just fill this block up, and then we cut out simple cuts that are related to the environment, and we kind of exaggerate that a bit. And the building then, as you can see here, in this diagram you can see how it works. It's really like a piece of styrofoam putting on the cutter and cutting out these spaces. And you see, this was the urban plan, so we didn't design this strange shape. If we had to do this building, we probably would have done it differently, but we had to design how these things would look like, exactly how these facades would be, and also we had to try to get the floor plans right in there. Well, this was also a project that took a lot of time. We had discussions with Enrico about architecture being some sort of time machine, and he said that it happens a lot in Milan, but also in the Netherlands. This project took a lot of time. We started in 1999. I think the urban plan was already a few years old then, and we finished it actually last year. So you can imagine, took a lot of time. We did 2 buildings. One office building, a small office tower, and one housing project. I'm going to show both of them. Gennaro, am I still?
Yeah, you have 20 minutes left.
Oh, that's good. And of course, again here we said, okay, we are not responsible for the main form, but if you work on a project so long, you start to adopt the form. Like if you have an adopted child or something, yeah? In the beginning you might say, hey, it's a bit strange, a bit weird, I wouldn't do it myself in that way, but when you work on it, when you work long enough, you start to, it becomes your project, and it becomes, yeah, you're feeling very responsible for it. So we said there was also all kind of urban regulations, for instance saying that the facade on the water had to be different from the facade on the inside, which is also again something that we didn't think of, but we said, okay, if this is the case, if we have this form, if we have these regulations about the facade, we'll make the best of it. And actually it was very interesting to work with so much restrictions. You could even say it was not so different from doing working with an existing building. Although in this case it was not a physical existing building, it was actually more a virtual existing building that you adopted. So here you can see the triangular plot of the office tower with an interesting program, because on the lower floor you can see there's a cut in the building. There was the water police, which had also had their own little harbor. They had a few office floors, and on top of that there were offices that had to be rented out, so they needed their own entrance. Then there was the parking, which also people had to should get out of the parking if in case of fire. So there was it was a very complicated thing to solve, functional, but it was also very challenging to make nice spaces there. Here you can actually see, if you stand on this area that was cut out of the block, so that you're looking to the harbor and you see the boat of the police arriving. Here are the drawings, facade drawings, and the floor plans, or some of the floor plans. And you can see that in this triangular shape on the ground floor, we made it a bit more complicated for ourselves by creating this outside space, which actually reduces the footprint even more. And then on the top, you see that cut that was taken out of the block actually also reduces the size, and in the end it becomes a relatively very small little tower. Well, one of the things was that it was offices, and offices actually are really dominated, and just go back to the floor plans, they are dominated by systems. The systems, how to place a wall, and it has to be very flexible. And our client wanted a system that actually had a rhythm of 240, 240, 120, 120, because that was more efficient for installations. Well, I'm not going into that. It would be also an interesting lecture. But actually what happened was that we ended up with a 1.20 meter grid in the facade. And then we said, okay, if that's the case, and we knew that there was also kind of restrictions about energy use. They said, we don't have so much money for your facade because we spend all the money on the Palace of Justice. So it has to be a cheap facade. But then in the case of for energy regulations, you can only make 30% of that facade open. So okay, we said, if that's the case, then it will be a facade with windows. And we experimented to say, okay, if there are windows, we know that we have 1 meter 20, but how can you make a building that still is lively, that is not becoming so typical office-like or so enormous, rigid? So we started to experiment, as I described, with patterns in different ways. This is an early experiment where we actually folded out the facades. This is a later experiment, and this is actually how the facades developed. And it's very difficult to understand. If you see the building, you think it's a completely random facade, but that's not really true, because there are certain areas in that facade where we actually say, okay, we're going to make it more dense here and less dense at another spot. We're also going to introduce kind of symmetrical elements in themselves, that you could say these form one unity. Yellow ones are forming another unity, and you could say they become the symmetrical organizing elements, and we combine it with another system that runs through it. So in the end, you can no longer read that anymore. So that was for us, a very interesting way of working. And this is a picture of how the facade, the composition of the facade in the end looks like, also with the different materials, because here we said, okay, we have the window will just be one of the panels in the facade. So you have the window, you have a panel which has is a very simple and relatively cheap panel made of kind of artificial concrete, very thin. But on the top we make it rough. We put on that top we put little glass. How do you say it? Glass rests of glass, which are then put in a machine, but they are still a bit rough. You can no longer. And they are put on it, so you get a very rough panel. That's the light gray panel. And the other one was actually the same panel, but then with a little bit dark cement in it. And that one was polished after putting in these glass elements. So you had a very shiny dark panel, and you had a very rough light panel, and then you had the windows. And with these three elements, we created a facade, because we wanted also to have a facade that was one unity, that you couldn't really say count the floors and do like this. So that's the idea about the facade. Here you can see how the two facades work together. On the other side, the building, we choose brick. Brick is, of course, in the Netherlands, a very rather simple and not so expensive material. But we wanted to have a special brick because we already in the area there were a lot of these 1990 buildings which were very heavy and very dark red or even black. And we said, no, we don't want it. We want something more light. So we found a company in Germany, and they had a brick in their collection, and we chose it in the beginning already of the. At an early stage we chose that brick, and then it took a lot of time before the actual building started, and then they found out that actually the company no longer had this brick because nobody wanted it. But we said, yeah, but we chose your brick, you better have it. So we were in a good position because it was an economic crisis, and this company really wanted to sell a lot of these bricks. So they made, especially for us, the brick. And the brick is very special. It is has a light bluish version and a light green version. I will show you the light green version in the housing block. And then it has a layer which is called, I don't know exactly the English word, but there's a layer with a little bit mother of pearl in it, which gives it a kind of metallic appearance. And then you put it in the oven, and when it comes out, it's not really glazed, because that was too expensive. A glazed brick is expensive, but it was something which gave it some kind of shiny effect, and we really liked it. And here you can see what we did in the brick facade. We actually used for the windows the same idea as on the other facade, but here we said, no, we will make the recessed windows inspired a little bit by the Leverens building in Stockholm. I think Hector will know the building. And then, of course, the interior of the building. This is the entrance to the rental offices, and we had very low space actually for the reception, but we could get a little more height at the beginning, so we made this rather dramatic staircase leading people up. Also very interesting, of course, was the interior of the police station that we wanted to do, because we really liked the police as a user, the water police as a user of this building. They were very funny people, because in their old building they didn't have so much to do, and they collected all kind of things. So it was really an office where people were, not so much was happening on the water, so they started to collect all kind of things. There were very funny things. And when we saw that interior, we said, wow, this is very special. So we told the police, what you are doing is very special. Not your work on the water, but actually the work in the office. And we even managed to convince them to not throw everything away when they moved to the new building, because they, of course, are part of a governmental organization, and that said, okay, if you do an interior of a police station, everything is already fixed. It is a house style and blah, 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 blah. So we could manage them to convince to get some of this old stuff and to put it in the new building. The new building is, of course, very new, but we also managed to find an artist who could do a project for so many percent, and he also introduced, even exaggerated this idea of their interior to make a new logo for them, which of course they not really officially have, but very interesting, of course, of this space is this combination of this working space in front of their office and then looking to the water. So you have a feeling of being inside, looking out, and then combining that with a kind of interior elements like lamps, lights, and all that stuff. And here you can see how we, for instance, this collection of, which you see over here. It's a very funny collection of one policeman that actually, when they went to a ship to control the content of the ship, he took little samples in these glass bottles, and he put them in one big shell. That's the one you see over here. And we thought that's amazing. I mean, if an artist would do it, he would immediately get a prize for it. And this guy is only doing it as an amateur. He's not even aware of the beauty of what he's doing. So we convinced them to keep that, and we installed that again in the interior by making in their house style, which also prescribed everything. It prescribed the interior walls and everything. So we said, okay, the only thing we need is an extra interior wall, also made of glass, and then we have the place for these little pots. You can see them here. Well, that's about the office building. Now I'm going to the other building. You can already see it announced in a very strange way. And this is not a photo montage. This is really the real building. It's very strange. You will see. That's the housing block. Again, okay, I will talk very fast. Again, this is a project that is, we didn't design the shape, but we worked with it. We worked with the content. You can see the strange shape with this very sharp point in here. What was this housing block? We said, okay, it's very simple. It will be people who will buy an apartment here. Why do they buy an apartment? They buy an apartment because they are situated at the water. This is a beautiful spot in Amsterdam. Everybody wants to live there. So for us it was very simple. Okay, we make these apartments, and also the client said, yes, people will make their own interiors. You don't have to worry about that. So we said, okay, in this strange shape, we managed to get 3 cores, bringing the people up to the top floor. At the very sharp point, for us that was essential. That's what we had a long fight, continuous fight with the client. We said, we want this sharp point to be inhabited. Because he said, no, we just put all the chimneys there. It's impossible that somebody can live there. We said, no, it has to be inhabited because it's very essential that the whole form is actually used for housing. And you can see, of course, it has the strange shape, but we managed to get actually quite simple, efficient apartments in there. And the basic idea of all these apartments, all quite different because of the different shape, but all they share one thing is that, okay, they have a beautiful open space near the water. And then on the other side, we say we make a much more closed side where you can imagine to have the bedroom, and there we want people to be more protected, but at the water, we actually want to have no facade at all, because actually we say it's not simply the view to the water, it's also the experience of the water, to experience the wind, to hear the boats that pass by, and to smell the water. So we managed to get an opening which is really, if you open the doors, a lot of people are actually scared to walk to the edge of the floor. And this is a kind of foldable aluminium facade that we managed to develop for that. And here you can see that facade. It's you see all these doors and you see the opening, and you can also see the little fence, which is completely made of glass, and we convinced the contractor not to put this glass with a thing on it, but to leave it as it is and to fix it on the ground. And then we come to the patterns again, because these bends in the facade, we use them to again introduce a pattern and introduce a motif in it. And we made special drawings for that, because in a way that was becoming actually the motif of the building. This one is a 3-dimensional motif, which is very interesting, because if you then look at when it was produced and the molding, it almost looks like an urban plan, because it has a 3rd dimension in it. And this is how it looked in the end. And we think it's nice, because it also when after time these panels will kind of get a little bit more dirty, you will actually notice that it will get dirty in the different layers also. So then even the pattern will become more visible, because now it's hardly visible. You really have to be very close to it. For the other side, which is not on the water, where we actually projected the smaller rooms, the bedrooms and things, we said, okay, this building will be in between an office and a huge palace of justice and a huge hotel. And all these architects made these buildings very abstract. We also did it with a little office tower. We said, now we have, because people will live there, we have to make it we have to show that it's a building for housing, that it's not an abstract building. So we were very inspired by buildings from India, where you have this kind of exaggeration of balconies and shutters and ornaments and stuff. So that's what was one of the first experiments. We said, okay, if we copy literally the facade of India and put it on, what will happen? And we actually liked this image, also because it introduced something of a plinth inside it, and we thought that's a good idea. The other thing is that here you can see an image of the brick. We thought that would be beautiful. It's a little bit greenish, but and this was the facade where the sun would come. at a certain way, when the light falls in it, the green becomes almost gold, and the color changes, just like a car with a metallic color. So this is what we had. We made a facade which had all these, in an Indian style, all these balconies, shutters, fences. And this exaggeration of all these little elements actually gave the building, on the one hand, we think still it's a high building, 11 floors high. It's still a metropolitan building, especially for in Amsterdam circumstances, but on the other hand, it also has the scale of the human inhabitant. Now the balconies, we developed them in such a way that different panels could be placed in different positions, which also would make the building more lively. We developed, of course, again a pattern, this time a pattern that was cut out of the aluminium. And here, again, I'm not going to tell much about it, but you can see that again, there are kind of symmetries in that, and things are changing, and in the end you can hardly recognize it anymore. It becomes some sort of chaos thing. 5 minutes? Oh, stop? 5 minutes was before. Okay. I'm going very fast through it. What we like very much is the shadows, of course. Also, we did a variation on the ground floor. Also, again, and in the interior, we also said, okay, here we don't have much budget, but we can simply print it on a very simple white panels. We get a black and white version of it, the drawing of it. And even, we did some experiments, even in the carpet, we managed to get a carpet which does the same thing in green. This is the little tower that's inhabited. It's an apartment of 9 floors, amazing. One guy is living there, and you only have, on the top floor, only room for a kind of spiral staircase. And he makes a little library over there. This is an interior that we did on the top floor. I'm not going to talk about it. This is a very, if you allow me, Hector, this is the project that tomorrow will be decided if it will really happen. So I'm very nervous about it. I will call Michael tomorrow or email him. This is an art project. We were working together with 2 artists we didn't know. We had never worked with them before, but some committee said you have to work with these 2 artists. And that didn't really work, so in the end we did the little building, you can see with the roof, and the other artists, one is doing the 2 large piles and the other is doing the wall. What was the assignment? They said we want you as artists, architect, to give expression to the meeting in an area which is full of schools. And they called it, it's a very provincial little town in the Netherlands, they called it a campus. Very strange word, because actually it was no more than a street with a number of large schools and parking spaces around it. So we said, yeah, that's a bit weird. Why talking about this campus? Is this kind of managerial way of giving it a name and then assuming that everybody will love it. But we said, okay, we talked with a number of students, and there were interviews with students that were already there, and we found out that actually the students lived somewhere else, and they came with a bus to this place, and then they went to their school, and they didn't have much communication with each other. So we said, okay, what is the meeting place here? It's the bus stop. So we have to design a bus stop. So the wall is designed by one of the artists, which is one of the bus stops. We actually said we did a little house, which also gives some shelter for the rain if you're waiting for the bus. And in the house, maybe something interesting is happening. We had to find out. As I was telling you, Hector, this morning, we were very much inspired by 2 buildings that you can find in the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm. This one is the Asplund Chapel. And of course, you can imagine it to be a place to wait for the bus very easily. The other one is also a very famous building by an architect called Leverens, and Hector knows a lot about it, and also Gennaro knows a lot about it. So, but when we visited Woodland Cemetery, of course this chapel was closed, and there was nobody that actually could open the door, and most people that go there, you will find you cannot go in, the door is closed. But there is a big keyhole in the door, and you can look through the keyhole. If you look through the keyhole, this is what you see. Isn't that amazing? This is the interior of the Leverens chapel. So we said that would be interesting to have a bus stop where you can actually wait for the bus, but also that there's a little building behind you where you could, maybe you discover something in there. Maybe it doesn't have to show immediately. So we made a door with a keyhole, and we also made these big chimneys, but the chimneys not for the fire, but actually to let the light come into this interior space. And then we said, what would be, we have had long discussions what this interior should be, and in the end we said it has to be a the most private interior that you can imagine, because the bus stop is then the public space, and the confrontation of the two would be interesting. So we said, okay, we make the bedroom of Vincent van Gogh, which is also an interesting painting in his oeuvre, because it's not only the distorted perspective, but it's also the fact that he made this painting without any shadow. It only uses colors, and there's no shadow painted anywhere. So what we did is we say, okay, we kind of built this interior exactly as it should be, as a reconstruction of that painting. Also, we made this whole building in concrete, so not in wood, but in concrete, and then in the concrete try to exaggerate the effects of wood with the textures and stuff like that. And this is the model that we made of it, where we said, okay, we're going to make it in one color. If everything is concrete, it will only have shadows from the light coming from above. And this is what you see if you look through the keyhole of that little house. Okay, that was my lecture.